In this episode of Grannies on the Go, baking biscotti is love. Meet a granny who grows this love by teaching her family the traditional medieval cookie recipe that has nourished families for over 700 years, biscotti, the twice-baked cookies. But make no assumptions. To do this, she must face two big dilemmas. The first one is, how will a grandmother teach the old-fashioned and the modern baking methods during a pandemic? And second, with social distancing, how will she safely deliver the cookies after they've been baked and find out which recipe the family liked the best? We start with the home studio and the lesson begins. I'll tell you that the first thing that I'm going to do is make this video because we're in a pandemic and my daughter-in-law asked me to teach her how to make biscotti the old-fashioned way with a wooden spoon and a bowl, and the other way is with a processor. So we're going to see what the difference is, and we'll have a little bit of a contest, and you'll see the vote coming up at the end. The first thing that I do is take 1/4 cup of butter and let it sit out overnight, or just put it in the microwave for just a few seconds to soften it up a little bit. The second thing that I do is I make sure that the oven is set to 350 and the rack is put in the middle. After I set the oven, then I come over and I grab 1/4 cup of pistachios, and in the old-fashioned way I simply chop them with a large chopping knife. This is my favorite one. This is a Cutco knife. And then I chop the pistachios in here. Now I'm going to transfer these cut pistachio nuts back to the bowl. I'm not going to add these until I mix the wet ingredients. I find that works a lot better. Some of the recipes have you put these all in at the same time with the flour, and I find that the nuts and fruit don't mix quite as well unless you do the liquid ingredients first. And you can see there's a big difference in the processed and in the simply chopped. So I'll add 1/4 cup of softened butter to each of the recipes. Oh, and I want to show you something that I love. I watched the America's Test Kitchen on public broadcasting, and this is the D-I-O-R-O spatula. It goes up to 600 degrees. It also is very flexible and wonderful to use. So I use these for baking and especially love them. My old ones, unfortunately, get all moldy because they're wood and plastic and they sort of come apart in pieces, and that means that a lot of liquids can get down, and even when I try to dry them out, the wood doesn't dry at a really good pace. Next, I add 1 cup of sugar to each. Next, I add 2 eggs. I actually do crack them in a bowl first because one of my superpowers is getting eggshells in mixes if I don't crack them in a separate bowl first. So here are 2 eggs cracked and just gently whipped with a fork. Baking is an art, and the art is of chemistry. It's a chemistry art. So one teaspoon of baking powder, and it's not soda. Baking powder and soda are leavening agents, and you want to make sure that the expiration date on this hasn't expired, because it really does make a difference. 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. Don't you love this? Oh, that smells so good. Just 1/2 teaspoon. I remember getting the vanilla from my my great aunt, we would actually have vanilla beans, and we would do all sorts of things to them to make a wonderful vanilla flavor. My favorite part of biscotti is right here. I have a mortar and pestle, which I love. It is made out of stone. I like to take 1 tablespoon of anise, and I do just a little bit of mortaring and pestling this so that I can unlock the flavors. Well, believe it or not, probably every time I accidentally put a little bit of extra anise in. I don't think you can ever have too much. I've heard it pronounced a lot of ways, and we pronounced it anise growing up. Well, then I found out that it's also pronounced anise. And then from other groups, I've actually heard anise, like eyes. So it's either eyes, niece, or is. You have to decide on that. What's important to me is that it's in the biscotti and it tastes so good. Now I just stir in the wet ingredients, and the anise just looks beautiful. And it smells so delicious. And then here's the noisy noise. But you can see how quick this stirs in, and it's also processing the anise and all of the ingredients as well, so that'll make a big difference. Next comes the fruit and the nuts. Oh, a yummy part. Now in the old days, I used to guess if the recipe said 3 ounces, my great aunt would just take a little handful and throw it in, and so I sort of grew up doing that or reading the box or the bag. But nowadays I have a scale. You can get them in all different sizes and colors. They're not that expensive. So I just put the bowl on the scale before it's turned on, and then I turn it on and that levels to 0. Then I add the fruit or the nuts and can come out with a pretty good amount that fits the recipe. The first is 3 ounces of almonds, and these are actually sliced almonds, and they're already toasted. Can you imagine? I was able to get toasted almonds, and you'll see a little picture of that in the video. I think the toasted ones taste a little bit better. The next thing I'm going to put in are 3 ounces of dried cranberries. I'm a little bit partial to one cranberry company. I'm not a spokesperson for them, but they are my favorite, Ocean Spray. And then I'm going to put in the pistachios, the 1/4 cup of pistachios. The next thing I'm going to do is mix all of these wet ingredients. Some of the recipes call for these ingredients to be mixed with flour. I don't know what's wrong with me, but if I put flour in before I mix these wet fruit and nuts and all the eggs and all, what happens is I just get this huge ball that's not, the ingredients aren't really evenly spaced, so I find it's much easier just to go ahead and mix it before I put the flour in. That pretty much obliterates the big chunks of nuts and fruit, so it's more well blended. Next I'm going to put in 2 cups of flour into my recipe. 2 cups of flour. This is one of my favorite times. It's a good exercise, and you begin to see the biscotti taking shape. And it usually comes out just in a perfect ball and easy to manipulate on a cookie sheet. Sometimes they call them bread, but it really is, I think, considered a cookie that people like to have with drinks like coffee, even orange juice. They like to dip in soup.
Or chocolate, nuts, jam, or any combination of any of them.
Now, see how this is getting very hard to manipulate, but I have a little trick to that. And now I'm going to do this one. We'll see the difference in processing it. All right. The cookie sheet that I really like the best is this one. It's a shiny one and it is air-filled, and it seems to always bake at a wonderful level. The cookies don't get too dry and they don't bake too fast. The cookie sheet that is the hardest for me is this one. It's one of these dark ones. When I cook on this cookie sheet, I have to lower the temperature or lower the cooking time because it cooks much hotter and faster. So I really prefer this cookie sheet, and I do have two of them. So I'll show you how I make the loaf. I have a trick to making the biscotti loaf, and I have a trick to making the Rice Krispies treats. It's the same thing. I learned this by trial and error because I had 4 kids and I was always having to do something with them or help them while I was cooking. Oh my goodness, this makes all the difference in the world in forming dough. So here we go. Let me show you how easy this is. So I just pile this on, and now I've got my gloves so I can just dig down in there with my fingers. Then my secret is to just get the gloves a tiny bit damp. You won't believe how wonderful this is. And you see, the dough doesn't want to stick to the damp gloves. All right, so I make a little snake here. You can see. See? And then I will flatten it out so that it's pretty much equal from side to side and length to length, and it's about the same length as this cookie sheet. It makes a little over 20 slices. I want to make sure that this is almost exactly the same thickness throughout. Otherwise, you can get maybe even raw dough in the middle and burned on the outside. Believe me, if you can make a mistake making this, I've made every mistake. So if you make it even like this, for the first bake, then it should bake evenly throughout. I'll do exactly the same for this particular processed biscotti. Now, I never bake 2 loaves at one time. My oven doesn't seem to accommodate it. It changes the temperature to baking time so much that I find it's just easier to cook one at a time at the regular recipe. I'm going to cook this for 40 minutes at 350 degrees, and I'll be right back. And you see now, no muss, no fuss. And the gloves don't stick. If they start to stick, you can just wet them a little bit again. If you're doing Rice Krispies treats or something like bread dough, you can just wet them again and they won't stick. It's really wonderful. All right, the biscotti's out for the first bake. And oh, does it look so delicious. It looks beautiful. So I let it cool for a little bit up here. And then when it's okay to touch it without burning my hand, that's when I start cutting it into pieces. Then I'll bake it a second time for 10 minutes at 350. I don't put anything on the pan, but I do take a spatula and just push it under the biscotti after I cook it to make sure that it doesn't stick to the pan. Now here we go. Got my knife, and I'm just going to gently roll the knife to cut it. I cut it about 1/2 inch or so wide. There we go, all cut. But I usually get about 20 Another thing that I do that's a little bit fun just for me is I take the two ends off, and I don't bake these twice. I put them on my great aunt's beautiful blue willow china. I put them there, and I snack on those during the second bake. Just a little secret. You can see how there is a beautiful image here of the fruit and the nuts inside the biscotti dough or the biscotti bread. Isn't that beautiful? All ready to go for the second bake. Both double baked and both yummy cut. I'll show you a little bit of the difference. This is the biscotti that's been processed, and then this is the biscotti that was just stirred. All right, I'm going over in the dark to deliver the biscotti. So I'm really excited. What I did was I made them each, this one's for Amir, I made them each 2 little pieces of biscotti, and one is the old recipe and one is the new recipe. I'm going to have them vote and see which one they like the best. And I made them a little basket with all the biscotti, old and new, in it. All right, I'm here. Put my mask on.
Hello.
Hey Ben, I'm here.
Hey.
We want to send the boys out.
Okay.
All
Let
right.
me get them ready.
All right. Love you, honey. Bye bye.
Bye.
Hello. I brought you guys a surprise.
Thank you.
I brought you some biscotti, but I'm going to ask you not to eat it quite yet. I'm going to give you some instructions because it's going to be a game. I'm going to let you test some different kinds, and then you're going to choose which one you like the best. Hi, sweetheart. It's so
These
good
are
to
all
see
different
you.
kinds.
They're different kinds, and I'll explain it to you in a little while. All right. See you later.
See you later, alligator.
Love you.
Crunchy, chewy. Crispy, buttery flakes. That one's really good. I loved the crunch of number one. This is 2. I like putting it on the other side.
I'm gonna try number 1 first. That's a really hard decision. I think they're both good, but I like 1 because I felt like it had a more variety of flavors. That's good. This one's good too. I think I like number 1 more.
Why?
Because when I took a bite of it, it tastes more good. Which one is that, number 1 or number 2? Oh, that's number 1. Ooh, he's going in. Please add it out.
All right, 1 was delicious. 2's really good too.
It's really good too.
I think I like 2. I think number 1 had like cranberries or raisins are in it, and I'd most likely be eating this with coffee, and I'd prefer it without the fruit in it.
So there you have it. Baking biscotti is love. A legacy of love passed on from generation to generation. Grannies on the Grow, changing lives one love at a time.